Yes, we do need to remember Leo Rogers, who was a part of our committee until October, when he passed on to his next venture of life. It's my pleasure to introduce the presenter, Sister Ilia Delio, a Franciscan Sister of Washington, D.C. We are very grateful to have Sister Ilia. She is the author of over 20 books. She's a prominent American theologian concentrating in areas of science, spirituality, and theology, with interest in evolution, physics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence, and the significance of these for theology. Sister Ilia holds doctorates in both pharmacology and historical theology. She teaches at Villanova University, where she currently holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology. She is the founder and executive director for the Center for Christogenesis, an online forum dedicated to the integration of science, religion, and culture, with a particular emphasis on Christianity and evolution. It is synchronous that this week, Matthew Fox, author of Original Blessing, has been talking in his meditations about becoming a spiritual warrior in a time of apocalypse. He says that the spiritual warrior stays connected to the new creation story from science about cosmogenesis, a phrase first used by Teilhard de Chardin. And it also, the synchronicity is a concept of Carl Jung. So cosmogenesis offers a unified version of the universe and humanity's place in it. Sister Ilia discusses cosmogenesis in her latest book, The Not Yet God, Carl Jung, Teilhard de Chardin, and the Relational World. To quote Sister Ilia, evolution is all about change. As such, life is never finished. We humans are never finished. God is relationship, and life is constantly seeking new and deeper relationships. God is becoming new. God is ever newness in love. It is my pleasure to welcome Sister Ilia Delio.
Well, thank you, Peg. And well, thank you. It's very nice to be here with you and to receive your opening remarks. I do what I do, and I've been doing it for a while, and that is reflecting on these core values of Christian faith. But in light of the world in which we live, as science now helps us understand this world. So I have a set of slides because pictures always, say 1,000 things, probably more than words can at times. And I have some very colorful pictures for you to understand some of these concepts that help frame where we find ourselves today. But I also want to understand where we are today in light of where we're coming from. So you mentioned how Voice of the Faithful began after a huge crisis of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And I'm trained as an historical theologian. So I like to begin with history itself to know, I always think if you don't know where you're coming from, you're going to have a harder time knowing where you're going to. History is very helpful for us to frame our understanding of what got us here. But then we have to understand maybe how do we move from here? And so that's a lot of what I'm going to try to share with you this evening. So I'm going to share my slides, by the way. I will need to be made a co-host. If someone can make me a co-host, Peg or Carol, I forgot to ask you that at the beginning. Just let me know. We
That
good?
you should be now a co-host.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Great. All right. Let's see. Uh, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna move this up. All right. So, well, let's just begin with the world in which we're living. It's not looking too good, right? I mean, now today, this week, we're hearing of the tremendous fires in California, really tragic fires that are devastating, some many, many homes and people's lives being disrupted. But our planet itself has been, we know this now for quite some time. It's been undergoing severe changes in its health, basically. Here we have the desertification, the drying up of the desert fields, water run dry, glaciers melting in the North Pole, species being displaced, poor being displaced from their homelands. So, there's something about us that has become very disconnected, quite honestly, from the earth, from the very stuff that gives us life. And part of it is the way we have come to think of ourselves on this planet. And, while Christianity holds, I think religion on the whole is a very important part of what we are, our Christian story was framed in a very different world. And that's part of our struggle today. I think if we go back to, how we began to conceive of God and world, we had something of this image where we had God as the creator, sort of the geometer, who ordains everything. And, we still hear it like God's watching over us and God knows what's going to happen. And this is a kind of an idea that God has ordained everything, and that that we can study the world as Thomas Aquinas did, and see a reflection of God in this world. Now, Thomas Aquinas, I'll just say this very briefly. He was a very, very smart man. He spent a lot of time studying and reflecting on things. But the source of his reflections on the truths of Christian faith really were the natural world and Islamic philosophy, especially Avicenna and Averroes. And he developed what we call a metaphysics. How do we understand the principles that sustain everything? And so he developed this kind of framework where he said, God is the unknowable one, so to speak, the essence, the being of being itself, from which everything emanates. All being itself emanates from God. And we here in creation, we're here and we live in relation to God. And our job, our task, in fact, our yearning is to return to God. So we hear this kind of scheme, things like we're companions on a journey, holy God, holy mighty one, this kind of language, the kind of song language, religious language that gave rise to this idea that God is perfect being, immutable, all-knowing, never had a bad day, God being. And we're here and we're struggling, but God is watching over us and we're making our way to God. I hope that sounds a little bit familiar to you from some training in the past. We also had this idea, we developed an idea that within this framework of a static, fixed cosmos in which God is at the top and we humans are at the center, that there was a hierarchy of being. This kind of thinking ushered in the Middle Ages, where stones had, the sort of the least existence, and plants had a little bit more, being, and then humans were at the center because we're made in the image of God. So we have something, that ties us to God. But then as you go up the ladder of ascent, you go from humans to angels, and then to the perfection of being itself, which is God. And so this kind of thinking did give rise to this idea that spirit is more important than matter. It's not that, it's not that matter was unimportant, it's that it was less important. So things like don't worry about your body or what you look like, just focus on your soul, focus on your spiritual life, because you got to prepare for death because you're going to God and you're going to spend all eternity with God. So kind of said, well, what about Earth? What are we doing here? And Earth was like a preparation station. It was like getting ready for the big game, so to speak. But I think this Christian narrative was very appealing and has been appealing and still is appealing today. We have a lot of people that are still very attractive to this static worldview of a God who is being itself, perfection of being, overseeing everything, a very orderly world ordained by God, by which a world that's corrupted by original sin, poor Adam and Eve, actually it's poor Eve that gets the shaft here, and that we have to get out of this weak and fallen world and be redeemed, and so we need a savior, and that's Jesus. It's a story. And one thing about Christianity, in fact, all religions have a story to go with them, because the human person is driven by the search for meaning, and we need symbols and we need narratives to help shape our meaning making. And Christianity has become a very attractive meaning making symbol system. And of course, the church, kind of fits into this perfect world order, certainly as it was conceived in the Middle Ages, with Jesus at the top and the popes and everything else. And, gosh, it's really a lot of work, quite honestly, all these levels of hierarchy. And, I have to admit, I kind of really lean toward the Protestant Reformation because I understand why they got, upset with so many levels of stuff. But anyway, we won't stay there. All I want to really get to is the fact that we had a revolution back in the late 15th century, 16th century, where, Nicholas Copernicus began to realize that it's not a static Earth. We're not fixed. We're not at the center of the cosmos. We're a little planet moving with other planets around the sun. And this became known as heliocentrism. Galileo Galilei was that famous Italian astronomer who said, yeah, that's right. That Copernicus was right, that this is not a fixed Earth. So, everything isn't fixed in place by God. If it is, guess what? It's changing, it's moving. And that was very disruptive to the church. So, of course, Galileo wrote this famous work, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, the old system of Ptolemy and the new system of Copernicus. All this to say is that, the Bible is not a science book. And the Bible, in a sense, shows us, in a sense, how to be in relationship with God. It's not telling us how the heavens go. But, the church never really took a whole hog view on modern science. The Cardinal Bellarmine in 1633 said the doctrine attributed to Copernicus that the earth moves around the sun and the sun stands at the center of the world without moving from east to west is contrary to Holy Scripture and cannot be defended or held. So the fact that the church originally rejected heliocentrism really landed Galilei into permanent house arrest, but it also kind of signaled how the church regarded the new findings of nature. And it was with great, great reservation, if not sometimes just rejection. And I think this landed us into what has been perceived in the modern age as a conflict sometimes between science and religion. That religion seems to have its own sphere of existence, and science has its own sphere of existence. This so-called dichotomy is perhaps the worst thing that could possibly happen to us, because there is only one world, and that world can be known in two ways. One, by way of meaning and ultimate concern, which is religion, and the other way by the way things work, which is science. But we need both. And so far, we have yet to reconcile these two areas. I think the split between science and religion was kind of further with Rene Descartes' philosophy, in which he, in order to secure some knowledge, Descartes was concerned about the search for truth and how do we know something with any certainty. So he, in a sense, separated the world of ideas from the world of matter, giving precedence to the ideal of of the mental world over the physical world. And this has, according to Ian McGilchrist, sort of given birth to what we can call the divided brain or the divided mind. Now, this is a very sketchy, colorful look at the brain, but basically we have two hemispheres, left brain and right brain. The left brain is involved with logic and analysis and control, it's reason. And then the right brain is involved with passion and creativity, in a sense that the right brain is the outreach brain to the world. But these two halves really should work together. In fact, they are held together by this band of fibers called the corpus callosum. But what McGilchrist found is that as we began to develop a split the mind from matter, treating matter as just stuff and the mind as, in a sense, the realm of the real thing. He said we began to develop sort of a split brain where the left brain, was focused on control and analysis, to, in a sense, sometimes the exclusion of the right brain. And we still have this divided brain still lingering among us. Especially in academia, there's a very high emphasis on detail, analysis, making sure everything is itemized and, explained away. Whereas the right brain is about art and passion and creativity. These two areas really need to begin to work together. But actually, we built a left brain world, to put this in very shorthand terms. Descartes' philosophy was ideal for Sir Isaac Newton's laws of physics, in which basically Newton gave us laws that helped us make sense of how we're structured as a world. So it became a world of lawfulness and orderliness. You get in your car, you stop at the red light, you stop at the stop sign. But you're in your car, you have nothing to do with the car next to you. And so it's a world where little atoms or little individual things are externally related to one another. So, I grew up in New Jersey. So, we had our house on one side and my neighbor at the next. If I didn't want to meet my neighbor, say my neighbor was here, I didn't have to go outside. I didn't have to extend so Newton's world means we're not necessarily related. We're externally related, not internally related. So the world functions like a machine. So when the part dies out, you just replace the part. It can be described this way: keep the rule and the rule will keep you. So we became very rule-abiding people, right? Especially if anyone was in religious life, you would know that very well. You just sit at your place at the table, do not go to anyone else's seat, especially the superior, or you'll be out. So a mechanistic world is where we have, in a sense, grown up, certainly between the 18th and 20th century. I'd say 19th for sure.
Sister, you've frozen.
Sister Ilia, can you, you're frozen?
Her internet might be just a little weak. She'll probably have to come back. Just have to
She,
come back.
it looks like she left. Maybe she'll come back. Everybody else is okay, right? You're all on
Yes,
and
yeah.
and
When that
functioning?
happens, it's best for the person to go out and come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Mine's
I
been
was,
going in and out. I went out twice already here.
It's also a good idea to close any other things, browsers, applications, anything that you might be doing on your computer when you're on Zoom, because it does use a lot of the random operating memory. So that may be a reason why it's freezing as well.
It looks like I froze. Did I freeze?
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
but you're back.
I'm back. Oh my. I was like, where did everyone go? Did I just slip away? Okay, so let's get back here. Now, do I have to, you have to give me permission to share again?
Let me see if I have to do that again. You may still be, hold on a sec. Okay, try it now.
Okay. I have no idea why that happened, but that was very weird. But that is life in the universe. So I guess we just go
Right.
with the flow. Okay. So basically what I think is, to this day, this is what I see is we still have an uncomfortable relationship between science and religion. Religion is done as the way we hear it discussed, the way it's formulated, the way it is thought about, apart from modern science, apart from actually any knowledge of the natural world. And I find that I find that really contrary to what Genesis 1 is about, where there's a power of life that we name as God, who is at the heart of all life that we name creation. So I think the split between science and religion has been problematic, as also there's a conflict between science and philosophy. Philosophy is struggling today to make sense of what is existence, what is being, and it looks to many, many different ways of, reflecting on existence. But I think one of the areas that philosophy is trying to hone in on is looking at what science is telling us as the stuff of existence itself. So these areas of science and of religion and philosophy, I think, have a need to be brought into deeper, more integrated relationship with science. Now, I say that because our world today is absolutely nothing like the world that the church grew up in. I mean, really nothing at all. It's not static, it's not fixed, it's not a hierarchy of being. It is really nothing like that. And it really goes back to the early 20th century where, Albert Einstein, among others, began to really question Newton's laws of absolute space and absolute time. And Einstein, in his very ingenious way, through a set of mathematical reflections, realized that time is not actually today, the whole concept of time is being severely rethought, and maybe there's no such thing as time. Now that's another discussion. We won't talk about that here, but imagine that if we actually live in a timeless, universe of some sort, where there's actually many dimensions of existence. Okay. But Einstein didn't think that. He just thought time is relative. It all depends, where one exists in space. So it's space-time. These are actually, it's a single continuum. And space-time is something that can change. It's relative to where one is. And this kind of, curvature of space-time, it depends on the mass and the energy in it, or what we call gravity. So these ideas gave rise to what we now know today. This is our universe. It's called the Big Bang universe. And, as far as we can see, some scientists say it's about 13.8 billion years old. More recently, they have suggested it is about 26.7 billion years old. It is very, 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 very old. So we can't even say how old. This universe just stretches, it has a beginning that we can't even really fathom, in terms of time. But what happened, let's say 14 billion years ago is something, came into existence. We don't know if it came from a previous universe, a black hole. If you've seen the movie Interstellar, you might get some new ideas here. But we do know that it's energy laden. It's just energy bound. And it has been expanding for about 13.8 billion years. Most of it is dark energy. Some of it is dark matter. And over time, matter has come into being in more complex ways, giving rise to galaxies and planets and all sorts of things, including us. So we're just part of a very large, dynamic, energetic process, which is pretty amazing. So we call this an expanding universe. And we ourselves may feel ourselves expanding sometimes with the universe. It's called gaining weight. It is a world of energy. If we were to say, what is one thing that has really shifted from the old paradigm to the new? And that's why I kind of refrain, or I use the term being a little bit reluctantly, because I want to refrain from abstract language. What we call being or existence today is better described by energy and information. Energy is really, as Einstein told us, it's the stuff of stuff. Energy is mass times the speed of light squared. So energy can exist in various states. If you take something, a drop of water, and you heat it up, you have vapor. So it's a different energy state. Same drop of water, same mass, but different energy state. If you freeze it, you have ice. So what we call matter is really energy, in the form, it's energy packed into form. And that's a paradigm shift in itself. We also know that that energy comes in discrete quanta or packets. And these packets can exist in both actualized or particular moments, and they can exist also as waves. So they have this kind of wave particle duality. It's a particle and a wave simultaneously, meaning that the stuff of life is not easily identifiable. We can't really say what matter is in itself. That's kind of putting this in a very shorthand. Quantum physics has really changed radically what we can say about the stuff of life. What we do know is that this stuff is entangled, meaning that once things interact, they are forever interacting. This notion of quantum entanglement means if you take two particles that have interacted and you separate them, that if you change the particle here on the desk in Bryn Mawr, and the particle on the moon will shift as well. And in other words, they are affecting one another. Just in the same way, I always use the example because consciousness works a little bit like this. The way we are mentally entangled with one another. You may have had a good friend or someone that you knew who moved away from New Jersey, and you haven't heard from them for 2 years, and all of a sudden you're thinking about them one day. So the thought in your mind now appears in their mind, and they call you or text you, and you say, I was just thinking about you. And now we can say we're quantumly entangled. So that's the thing. Always make sure that when you entangle yourself with someone, just know it's going to be for life. So it really does make a difference who your friends are. What we do know is that matter is not composed of building blocks, but really just webs and webs of relationship. This notion of being intrinsically relational is not poetic. It is actually the deepest, the best description of our reality at this point. We are deeply interconnected with everything to everything else. So what we can say about nature, and that's why even the term nature, I find just a little bit abstract sometimes, because I'm not sure when we use that language of nature, if we really have a sense of how deeply entangled we are within the fields of energy that comprise the stuff of life. So as David Bohm said, the nature of the universe is undivided wholeness. It's so interconnected that Paul Dirac once, quipped. He said, well, it's so interconnected that if you pick a flower on Earth, you move the farthest star, meaning that our actions here actually have deep resonance, they have deep effects across the cosmos. Now, added to this is one of the hottest topic today is consciousness, our awareness of all that exists. Max Planck, back in the early 20s, said, I regard consciousness as fundamental and matter as derivative from consciousness. I mean, that is really fascinating. Matter, nothing exists apart from consciousness. He says we can't get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything that we regard as existing begins with consciousness. Basically, Erwin Schrödinger said the same thing. We don't know what consciousness is, but it cannot be accounted for in physical terms. It's not just something that the human brain has, or it's something that is absolutely fundamental, almost as fundamental as gravity itself. Some people speculate that consciousness is light, that light itself may indeed be part and parcel of consciousness. What we do know is we don't have consciousness. Consciousness has us. It is prior to, in a sense, everything that we are. And so this has given rise to new concepts, philosophical concepts of our existence or being today, what we might call panpsychic, meaning that matter, there's no such thing as matter that doesn't have some level of mind or awareness to it. And that's hard for us. I was looking at my refrigerator this evening. I'm thinking, I can't imagine my refrigerator has consciousness in it, or my faucet, and it seems odd for us to think these things because we're thinking out of some kind of old concepts, quite honestly, of nature. We have to rethink what it means, what nature is about fundamentally, and begin to realize that although my refrigerator or sink maybe not be thinking, she's looking at me, that the qualities of what this stuff is in a sense open to this kind of matter awareness. Now that also then opens up to this, I'm doing a lot of science here because this is actually how we're going to get to theology. The stuff of evolution. Evolution still to this day, I'm just shocked the fact that we never speak about evolution. We think it's something that maybe happens to animals or it's happening in the, Museum of Natural History, but this can't be us, But the fact is, we are here because of evolution. And evolution simply means that life changes, right? Life is a process. Nothing is fixed. It doesn't even run that mechanistically, quite honestly. Up until the 19th century, we thought that systems were closed, a closed system means it's bounded. I put energy in the system does some kind of work, uses up the energy, and if nothing new is put in there, it's going to shut down. The Catholic Church is a little bit like a closed system. In other words, it's bounded. It requires, it requires input. It requires like priests and electing a new pope and, going to mass and all these things to keep this, this system going. But if nothing else is, put into that system, it will eventually wear down. An open system, on the other hand, is far from equilibrium. So an open system is in what we call non-linear type of order. It's spontaneous. It can have spontaneous new order within it. New things can happen, because it's open to the environment. So an open system, this is a little fuzzy, but it runs on a type of principles that we now know characterize nature. For example, complexity. That here I'm going to use that chaos theory, meaning that old order may break down, but new order is constantly emerging in an open system. It emerges in very subtle ways, as sometimes we call this a fractal. There's a new pattern. And I think that's what's going on here as we move from Vatican II into this 21st century, maybe a Vatican III church or something new. You kind of discern something's taking place. There's some kind of new pattern that's forming. And then over time, these fractals add up and they become new things, emergence. So we have complexity, self-organization, autopoiesis. Nature is working on all these principles that we know of today. It's very, very dynamic. The three kind of, I think, three main principles of evolution are, I should say, emergence here. That goes along with complexity, meaning that the degrees of relatedness continuously increase over time. And with the rise of complexity is the rise of consciousness. Science, this is what science does. It's trying to understand how are these things working to make us what we are at this point. What we do know is that this process of evolution is also a very long time. If you think of evolution in terms of 30 volumes, each volume having 450 pages and each page a million years, volume 1 would be the Big Bang. But 20 volumes later, comes life on Earth. And then even then, it's another 9 or so volumes before we get to dinosaurs on page 385. And then this is our volume 30. The mammals appear, and then, those are elephants and whales. And then we're kind of right after that comes the human beings. Page 450 of volume 30, and the last line would be us. So we humans are coming after a very long period of evolving life, which is, one thing we've got to get our heads around is like, we think like, oh my gosh, here we are, it's all changing, it's all going to die out. We have to rethink how we're thinking about things. We come from a very long process of emerging, evolving life where complexity is part and parcel of life. That is actually what's going on in our lives as well. So nature is marked by change. It's constantly becoming something new and more complex, meaning it's becoming more unified over time. Time itself is irreversible. As far as we know, we are not going to get younger. We're not going to go back to the 3rd century. Nature is this complex of interacting forces, and it's law and chance. There is playfulness in nature, spontaneity. Nature is open. So, if you go to the Smithsonian in the Human Origins exhibit, you'll realize that evolution is not background to our story. It is our story. These are our relatives. We have a long lineage of hominid and hominid relatives. So we're here. You don't see it too well because this slide is a little cut off, but we're here after a very long period of time, and we are this universe on the level of self-consciousness. Now the question is, where are we going with it, right? Where are we going in this universe? As you mentioned in the beginning, we're unfinished. Evolution is an ongoing process. We are in evolution. We are being created as we create. Life is constantly moving towards newness, and it moves best by creative power. And our fastest evolver today, as I always remind people, is technology, in case you weren't aware, right? I remember growing up in New Jersey where the first cell phone came out back in the 70s by AT&T, and they said, they're going to have a phone you can put you can hold. And I said, that's crazy. It's on the wall. It has a 3-foot cord. They said, no, you'll be able to walk around with it. I said, no, that's impossible. By the 80s, they said, they're going to put a computer in the phone. I said, what's a computer? Right? So all of this technology has exponentially evolved within our own lifetimes, to the point now we can gather, in various places on through this platform called Zoom, which is remarkable, right? We could have never have conceived this back, say, in 1960 or 65, when the Vatican II Council closed. So most things are in evolution at a rapid rate. Some things are just evolving, less rapidly. And that would be maybe the role of women in the church, but we'll leave that for another story. So as Rosemary Radford Ruther says, both science and religion need a profound repentance, a turning around of their worldviews and their ways of operating that will bring them into solidarity with the parts of the world they have until now seen as the objects of their knowledge and power. And I think that's really true. Both science and religion have grown up as institutions of knowledge and power and have basically dominated most of the planet in various ways. And our planet can't sustain this anymore. We need a real radical turnaround in both of these areas. This is actually where Teilhard de Chardin I think, makes his great contribution. Teilhard was a Jesuit, a paleontologist by training, and someone who was deeply committed to the Christian faith. And so, he began to realize that Christianity can no longer, it's lost its staying power. It can't sustain itself. It has nothing really to offer unless it can update these core doctrines of God and salvation and this meaning of Christ. So, he asks, who will give evolution its own God? It's a great question. And that's, in a sense, what we must live into. It's not an answer to be given. It's a way of life to be, in a sense, engaged. Now, one thing I think that Teilhard recognized in a less explicit way, but I think this is true. And the more I think about, as I myself, continue to reflect on these matters, he did not see Christianity as normative of all religion. In fact, Christianity, if we go back to the very origins of this movement, wasn't precisely that. It was a movement that emerged out of Judaism. Jesus of Nazareth was Jewish. He was born Jewish. He died Jewish too. His mother was Jewish. His father was Jewish. He was never anything but Jewish. And somehow we have made all of this Jesus into Catholic, and that there's this thing called the Catholic Church, and that it's the one true church. And I'm saying, wait a minute now. Let's hold back here. What Teilhard recognized is that there is something profound that has taken place in the person of Jesus. Something has broken in, like a big bang, sort of a religious big bang. But he says Christianity is really normative of evolution. In other words, mind and matter, divinity and materiality, something is taking place here that is, in a sense, synthesizing and becoming more and more unitive, almost like a one as a person rising up in evolution. So Teilhard was fascinated by this idea of panpsychism, or mind matter. And he said, there's something here, there's a power that's, in a sense, part and parcel of evolution and not subject to the forces of evolution, that he called Omega. Omega is a principle within evolution and yet distinct from it. And of course, he will go on to, identify Omega with what we call God. God here, and it's the language of God that I think can trip us up sometimes. That God is sort of this, like, how can God be part and parcel of something and be God type thing? And this is probably another discussion, but that word God, are we using it symbolically of existence itself? Because God identifies God's self as I am, to Moses, like I am who I am, meaning God is being. So being is the dynamism of that which is becoming, which is Omega. Or is God this big guy in the sky, which is how a lot of people conceive of God, right? This big dude who's watching over us and it's all going to be well because God is there. And Teilhard's like, well, let's back up here. There's a power here that's within and more than, right? In and ahead, something pulling us on. And he says this power, this presence, is a presence and an energy of love. This love has, maybe you could see it in two dimensions of energy. It has attractive energy and it has radial energy. It attracts, things keep pulling together in this universe and they move forward, something more, the more than. And so he goes on to describe love as the core energy of the universe. Love as a cosmological force, attracting, uniting, giving rise to something new. And he says this force of love energy is present from the beginning, but indistinguishable from molecular forces. This is pretty novel, and yet, quite honestly, even some scientists, believe it or not, are beginning to kind of yield or bend in this direction. No scientist is going to take this hogwash, but they really are beginning to see there's something here. So Teilhard says, driven by the forces of love, the fragments of the world are seeking each other so that the world may come into being. This is now it brings together sort of the best of what we can say from the side of physics, and yet also what we can say from the side of religion. I mean, in John 4:13, John writes, God is love. Like what God's being is love. God is that deep relationship of unitive being. And therefore, there's a power here being, at work in our universe, pulling us into ever more being. And so I've called this kind of a God world entanglement, that what we are and what God is are deeply related, deeply entangled. And of course, love is an entangler energy, an energy of entanglement. Once you fall in love, there's something about that energy that is so real, and where one becomes, in a sense, in a mystical way, part of the other. And so I don't think these things can be reduced to scientific measurement or explanation. And I think one thing that science is opening up to is the place of mystery today, a kind of a God world entanglement. So Teilhard's theology is like this. God is not just sitting, watching over the world. God is part and parcel of the world. There's kind of a God world holism. God is part of the world, and the world is part of God. God is affected by the world, and the world affects God. There's like a complementary pair, because it's a love relationship, right? You can't have a love relationship and have one part say, nah, I really don't care about, I don't care what you do, because I don't really need you. And the other says, oh, I need you. So love requires mutuality, right? It's mutual relationship. And I do think, in a sense, that's what Teilhard is holding out for us. God is divinity. And by divinity, I think, I don't mean just sort of otherworldliness, because I don't know where the other world is. But by divinity, there is an overflowingness. God is inexhaustible love. In other words, unquenchable love that no human could ever manipulate or control. And yet, the universe contributes something that's vitally necessary to God. And that is, love needs to be shown. It needs to be actualized. So God needs the world to be God. Like otherwise, God is just the idea of love or the concept of love. So creation does contribute to God, something that God does not have within God's self, and that is materiality. So in Teilhard's view, evolution is not only the universe coming to be, but God is coming to be. And that's really hard for us to get our heads around, but it should be kind of straightforward from a Christian perspective, but I'll tell you that in a minute. God is becoming God in and through us through the power of love. And that's kind of interesting. So he says God and the world are in the process of becoming something more together, because the universe is grounded in this center of love. You cannot separate the evolution of God and the evolution of what we are. So Teilhard sees this union, this kind of love energy union between God and world in this rise of the Christ, basically. So this God and world are in process together, and it's what we mean by the Christ. There's something of that divine love that is part and parcel entangled with the inside of matter itself. So he kind of points this idea that matter is Christified, that, what God is in a sense in the self-emptying of God, or in a sense, God, this divine love, becoming element and drawing everything through love into the fullness of being, which means that God is not found in opposition to matter. God is found in matter. Matter matters to God, right? So every leaf, every tree, every stone, every human person, every single thing has God, in a sense, has a God dimension to it, right? There's nothing outside everything that exists. So Teilhard says it's a divine milieu, right? The whole of this planetary life is the place of God's dwelling and God's becoming. So he was very earthy. He was a scientist, a paleontologist. So in that touch of the earth, he believed he found an absolute that drew him and yet remained hidden. Matter really is important for Teilhard, because it's the primordial essences from which all emerges and to which it returns. So he has this beautiful prayer on matter. I bless you, matter, in your totality and your true nature. You I acclaim as the inexhaustible potentiality for existence and transformation. I acclaim you as the universal power which brings together and unites. I acclaim you as the divine milieu charged with creative power. The divine milieu charged with creative power. Raise me up, then matter, until at long last it becomes possible for me in perfect chastity to embrace the universe. We do not have, this is a fully incarnational statement. And I think what we do not have, certainly, whether Catholic or Protestant, really, is a fully incarnational theology. We have sort of a quasi-incarnational theology. But, you know, from the Catholic side of things, even though Pope Francis has given a lot of leeway to Laudato Si and care for the earth, the theology of his documents are still very Thomistic, medieval. There's still a primacy of the spirit over matter. But until we can take matter seriously, in other words, the body is the place of God, the earth as the place of God, we cannot really have a fully incarnational spirituality. So Teilhard says we live in an entangled universe of inseparability, where everything is connected to everything else, including God. So he wrote, I see in the world a mysterious product of completion and fulfillment for the absolute being himself. We have work to do here because our theology is not even remotely near here. It's something that is still of the Middle Ages, and we throw in it something else and something else. But Teilhard says really what he's pointing to here is the centrality, you might say, of the mystery of Christ. Christ is not just Jesus of Nazareth. Christ is that mystery of divine love incarnate, so that everything that we're about is being Christified. In other words, divine love incarnate, actualized into greater unity. And of course, we might say that Jesus of Nazareth is certainly the model or the exemplar. Teilhard wrote very, very little, by the way, on Jesus of Nazareth, maybe about 3 lines. But I do think that, you know, he did hold to this idea that even Pope Francis has pointed to, and that is, it's not a world grounded in sin. Actually, in my own view, I think original sin was one of the most unhelpful ideas that ever entered the Christian faith. And I would be the first to vote it out, quite honestly, because it's unbiological. It has absolutely no bearing or no grounding in what we are. And I think it is not even theological. It's not even in Scripture. So I think what is more in Scripture is that God is love, and that, as we read in Ephesians and Colossians, Christ is first in God's intention to love. So what God, you know, putting this really, you know, in just like table terms, God is love and God loves to be loved, period. You know, it's like God needs us to be loved. And that's because that's what love does, right? I mean, every single person, everything that exists is seeking to love and to be loved. It's actually that simple. And I think Jesus, in a sense, shows us the way. I think in this respect, what Jesus is about is a universe that is growing up in love. And it comes into, you know, a person in time who, in a sense, responds in love, in that deep awareness that Jesus had of this presence of God. And so these big terms that we use, christogenesis and, you know, all this stuff, it's really about, you know, the enfleshment of love, giving flesh to love in our lives, actualizing the presence of that love in a way that, you know, following the path of Jesus, through compassion, through peace, through justice, through nonviolence. This is a path of building up a unified planet in love. So Jesus is, in a sense, the new person. He's in a sense what we're about, right? We're here not because we like what we are. We're here because we want to become more than what we are. The whole point of Christian faith is not to validate what we have. It's to invite us to become something more, something different. And I think that's what Jesus symbolizes for us. A new type of person, I use the word cyborg. That really makes people really nervous because it comes from the technological side of things. But it means that, no one knew. I mean, his own disciples didn't know what Jesus. Who do people say I am? Well, some say you're John the Baptist. I don't know. Some say you're God. I have no idea. Who are you? Right? Did Jesus know he was God? That's a huge, huge area for us New Testament scholars. So what we're saying, even about ourselves, because I think Jesus is symbolic of what we are. We cannot say with any great certainty, I know exactly what I am. I know I'm not God. Really? You have infinite potential to become something more than what you are. And I think that's what Jesus is in a sense about. We change, to become something new, to become a new person requires a mutation of mind and heart. Jesus was a strange attractor, this young Jewish man doing very strange things and pulling, followers into a new pattern of living. He acted out of a center within himself, this what Beatrice Bruteau calls a spondic energy, this kind of, spontaneous energy, like going into a temple and, knocking tables over or healing a woman, of doing crazy things, right? Christianity is never meant to be a domesticated, suburban, middle of the road religion. It's actually outlandish. Jesus was really kind of crazy in his own way. That means Christian life should be on the edge. It should be really, we should be really thinking out of a new box. We should be thinking in radically new ways. We're not here to validate the norm of, what is. We're here to say what God is doing, that there's something new breaking into our lives. And we are, in a sense, we have experienced that newness within ourselves, and we are giving witness to that newness in our life. But I find sometimes, and that's why it's so sleepy, and young people are like, oh, I'm going on my virtual, I'm going to play my virtual game because it's more exciting. I have more possibilities there. But I think Jesus shows us that godly life is overcoming obstacles and dualisms that stand in the way of deeper personhood and community, right? And that's the constant pull of humanity, right? We're constantly torn we're torn within ourselves. We have egos, we have our opinions and our judgments, and that get in the way of actually reaching out across boundaries and barriers. But we are called into personhood. Personhood is not a given. Personhood is actually the call of our lives. To be a person is to be a deeply relational being. And so we're called into community. Not to presume that we're in community. It's a dynamic way of being. And of course, the early disciples give witness to the fact that Christian life emerges, actually, as some scholars, indicate, at the resurrection. There was a new awareness that this man, Jesus, was not just any ordinary man. Something was God was deeply present in his life. And therefore, I think what Christianity is about is a breakthrough in consciousness. And what I find today, and what I have found actually for years, is that the church prevents a breakthrough in consciousness. It doesn't want us to come to new levels of consciousness. It wants us to stay at a very childish level of consciousness so that you can be obedient and obey, which is very nice if you have to grow up. But, hopefully by now we've grown up. And that's what Christian life is about, a mature sense of taking hold of what we are as, called into God and called into new being. And therefore to belong to the cosmos in a new way. So we are co-creators. That's our job. We are to co-create this universe. There is no, and this is why, the whole discussion on technology today is, on one hand, I'm like, oh my God, because we're so fearful of it. It's like, oh my God, we're going to become robots. Computers are going to take over our lives. And I'm like, we're the ones creating this stuff, right? So it's about us. And somehow we lose sight of that. We are the creators as we're being created. So we're part of this process. And, what Christianity is about is to wake up to the process that God is empowering through the energy of love. Jesus had this kind of sense, look, it's new wine put into new wineskins, right? How many times we've heard this? But somehow we have new wine dripping out of old skins, and it's sort of the skins aren't holding anymore, and it's really all over. And when something leaks, when wine leaks, it is not good, right? It gets all over the place. It's really a mess. So we really want new wine skins for what's coming to be. So all of this to say is Christianity is a religion of evolution. I think it has been this from the very beginning, except for in the year 33 AD, we didn't know what evolution was. So the gospel writers couldn't write about it then. But we know more now. We know better. And I do think maybe what we need is a fifth gospel. I mean, we have closed the canon, but honestly, we fixed these things. And I think it's time to open them up again and to realize that God is still writing this universe into being. And God is writing this universe into being in and through us. And so we can't just sit back and say, oh my God, the world is all falling apart. And what are we going to do? It's like we're here, and we have now to take hold of what we are in the deepest sense of what we are. And that is, in Teilhard's view, consciousness is the name of the game. And that's why Carl Jung's ideas or Teilhard's ideas on interiority. And I don't know if you look like you're practitioners of centering prayer or meditation. And that is very, very helpful, gathering our minds into a deeper center of integration where we can, in a sense, access the deeper energies within us. We're wearing ourselves out trying to solve the problems of the world when, in fact, the whole world is what's taking shape within us. And so our job is to go inward in order to go forward, rather than becoming dissipated or worn down by all the information and all the news and all the stuff that's happening around us. So I'm going to end it here because we probably want some time for Q&A or for questions of discussion. But all I can say is it's just beginning. I think the church, quite honestly, is on the threshold of a very new, a new beginning in the 21st century. I'm not sure it'll be, as it is, but I see a whole revolution on the horizon. So let me stop there.
So,
Questions?
thank you. I mean, I don't even know where to start to say anything, but does anybody have any questions or comments that you would like to address to Sister Ilia?
Wow. It's
Mind
great.
blowing.
It's great to see that someone's thinking about new wineskins.
Exactly.
Yes.
Ron. Oh, Ron and Kathy. Okay.
Can you say, Sister, how you see the church on the edge of moving forward more in more of an evolutionary way? Because I'm
Yeah.
seeing it more stagnant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't think the church as it is going to hold indefinitely. It's starting to, to wear thin. I do think when I say church, so there's two ways of using that. There's the institutional church, which is Rome, but then there's the church of ecclesia, which is what you are, right? We're called into church, we're called into community. And I think when I say there's going to be a revolution, a renewal of church, I think we're going to deinstitutionalize and we're going to reformat ourselves as cosmotheantric, in other words, what you're doing, small communities of empowering faith so that we may be church in the world, like calling the planet itself into community. Institutions have relative function. They were never meant to be absolutized as we have. And I think the worst thing that we have done for ourselves in the last few hundred years is absolutize institutions. That we have what we call ontologized them. We've given them a power, we've given them a status and a being that can't be changed. And absolutely, if you look over the sweep of evolution, everything changes. And I mean everything. And unless we really do make a concerted effort to revitalize Christianity in the 21st century, I do think, well, I don't think the Catholic Church is going to last indefinitely, quite honestly. It's losing ground, and it doesn't speak to younger generations. And if it does, it's fracturing them. You know, we have the ultra fundamentalists who want to go back to the 13th century. And actually, that's like saying to AI, hey, come on over and take us over. Because if you retreat from the world, you give space to the world for something new to come in. And that's where AI is saying we will remake ourselves. So what we can't do is slow down the forces of, we can't slow down evolution, and what has happened is religion has kept us back, quite honestly. It has kept us constrained. We have developed mindsets where we can only do so much. Look at the Catholic Church. Women can't even get to the altar. I mean, no less serve on the altar. So it's outrageous, quite honestly, in the 21st century that we still cannot get women on the altar, even say to give a homily, wow, seriously? So it's no longer tenable. It's no longer feasible. And yet the church itself, I think Christianity, in fact, I think Catholicism in its root meaning, Catholicity as wholeness, has a lot of value for this earth, has a lot of value. We have a lot to offer, but it has to be like everything else. For example, it is amazing. Imagine if we didn't have electricity, we didn't have cars, we didn't have hot water, we didn't have, computers. What would our lives be like? They would be difficult. We'd be tilling the earth for food. We'd be, having to cook our water, heat our water. What technology does, it makes life easier to free us to be creatively live our lives in a way that could hopefully, contribute to the overall welfare of the earth. But the church keeps us, and so you can, the analogy here is that faith is meant to empower us. It's to give us a zest for life. It's to give us the energy for life. It's about ultimate concerns. It's to say we live for something, right? We're not just dangling around here. We're not just, hanging out on earth until it's all over. We live for something. And so that's the thing. It's like, I think the church, people say, well, how it's going to be reborn? Well, the Center for Christogenesis will be one way, a way.
Thank
Kathy.
you. Kathy Nevins has her hand up.
Hi, Ilia, and all of my friends. Here I work with children a lot, and I really think that the church is not going to change for our generation. I think the only hope we have is to instill in children the sense of nature from which God exists, where God is. And so, as grandparents and parents, pulling your children away from the mechanics and the electronics and immersing them in activities that when I do, here's an example. When I do First Communion training, I teach the children it's about love of God, love of family, love of nature. And we would always do, every other week, we would do a service project that included those activities, because then the children ask the theological question after they have the experience of love of others and love of nature. And so, I mean, I don't know how you think about that, Ilia, but
Yeah, I think that's good. So I think what nature does, it slows us down, right? And it connects us to something deep within us. I mean,
Yes.
one thing I have found is I think technology, right, social media has so pulled our attention away from the inner self to all these terrains of information.
Right.
So we're sort of emptied out within. Young people, I mean, I know Mark and you, Kathy, and probably others here. Young people are anxious and they're, a little bit, they can't find themselves, and they can't slow down sufficiently. And so there's two things, I think. One is nature is very important. I think returning to nature is the first step to healing, which means unplugging, time away, and just playful, and not just solitude, but playfulness. Nature is very playful. So play is a really important part of regaining a sense of self. I think the second thing, though, is in a sense discovering the Christic dimension of our lives, that we have an infinite potential within ourselves. I think Jesus called to love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. We have not been, in a sense, empowered to love ourselves. That means to embrace ourselves, to the self itself as a journey of an endless, ongoing reflection. And I'm sure many of you have done things in your lifetime you didn't even think possible, right? I didn't think I had it in me to do that, right? And that's the idea, is there's something within us. And that something within us is what we mean by that presence or that power of God. God as that ground, that horizon of infinite potential. And I think helping young people discover that for themselves is very, I mean, I could tell you, because I taught a course last semester called What Am I? God, Self, and World. And we spent the second half of the course on the Christic self, and it was like an awakening to them. They never heard of this, but it was liberating that that they weren't alone, that there's a presence within them, and that they need to spend time there. So what Kathy was saying, nature, slowing down, and just being. You don't have to necessarily pray. I think just to be is to pray. In a sense, just getting out of the mad rush of this treadmill life, this constant news feeds and information that we're enmeshed in. It's very, very unhelpful. Can the church be reborn from within? Absolutely. I think Christianity is a religion from within, not from without.
Okay, thank you. Mary Ellen has a question or comment.
Well, first, I want to thank you for the talk. It was fascinating. One of the threads that goes through your presentation was the idea of consciousness. And I'm really confused because my idea of consciousness is that there's awareness. And if you talk about a refrigerator having consciousness, it doesn't fit. So would you please clarify that for me?
Well, there are, if I talk about consciousness as an awareness, in other words, there's an aspect of materiality that may have, when I say awareness in materiality, it can be anything from a contextualized presence within relationships. It's usually within relationships, right? So we are thoroughly relational. So in terms of that consciousness or awareness, even in terms of, say, chemical reactions, there is a sensing that goes on, even among the chemicals, believe it or not, which what we might call a proto-consciousness or a primitive form of consciousness, which means that consciousness doesn't just, come in out of nowhere once humans get on the scene, that it's an aspect of materiality that over time builds up. It becomes part and parcel of the complexity of matter. So it might show itself in ways that are not familiar on the level of molecules or atoms, but on the level of humans, it becomes manifest as awareness and self-awareness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Wise has a question.
Oh, God.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, sister. I take a lot of what you've been saying, the word interconnected and entangled comes to mind, and it reminds me of something I heard some time ago, like, why did God create people? And the answer was, is because God was lonely. So that's sort of a layperson's interpretation of what you're saying. That shows a degree of entanglement and connectedness. I guess another example of that I have experienced is that we have ways of, in this interconnectedness with everyone, as you were saying, pick a flower and you change something on a star someplace, is that we have ways of communicating with one another beyond our five senses. And I would accept that as
I have no family.
I'm sorry, as a general rule, but I experienced two occasions when
Oh, sorry.
Oops.
I just had to unmute for some reason. I got muted. I experienced two times when people communicated with me, I guess telepathically. One was I was in a room full of people at a conference, and a fellow I know, who was a reporter for New Jersey News, was seated way behind me. But everyone in the room was focused on the speaker, who was Bill Moyer's son, who was an addict, and talking about how he had gone through recovery. So we're all fixed on the speaker. But I felt this need to turn around to my left, because I felt this need to turn around to my left. I didn't want to be disrespectful to the speaker. I mean, the speaker was engaging. But I turned around and I looked, and I saw Michael Aaron, the reporter for New Jersey 12, who's recently deceased, by the way, looking right at me, and he nodded his head like this down to say hello, and I nodded back. I had no rearview mirror other than this telepathic loop. This kind of event happened one other time in my life. It was out on the street, and there was someone in a car who had stopped the car, and they said my name as I was getting out of my car. There was no way I would audibly hear that, but I heard it inside my head. The word was Peter.
Yeah.
And I was drawn to that other car, and I went and talked to the person. We had a conversation.
Yeah. No, I do
Um,
think so. No, that's really interesting, actually, because I think those kind of experiences are quite real, because we think of ourselves as discrete, individual subjects, but actually, if we were to rethink about ourselves as nodes within a complex field of relationships, then we are constantly being affected by and affecting everything that's around us. So, it's how we're thinking about ourselves sometimes. Uh, the old adage that mind shapes matter, or mind over matter, we used to say, right? So if we think of ourselves as individuals and we find these phenomenon strange because they say, oh, that seems strange. But if we rethink of ourselves as nodes within complex fields of relationships, then they're not so strange. That there are different forms of communication that beyond nonverbal communication, experiential communication, teleportation communication. So these things are quite real, I think. And science, I just finished a very interesting book by Candace Pert called The Molecules of Emotion, where she begins, in the latter part of her career, she begins to see the deep connectivity between mind, brain, and a mind, body, and emotion. So, so thanks. Yeah.
Louise Murray?
Well, I'm so glad this is going to be recorded and available, because I'm going to view it many times, sister. Thank you. You so focus on love and all of this. And I've, at this moment, would really like to believe that love is stronger than hate because of some insensitive social misinformation on social media. Is there any scientific support for that notion? Maybe what we say of love being stronger than hate. It seems we have a big legacy.
Yeah, I actually think there are two forms of the same reality. So, here's the thing: is that we humans, to love, there must be a kind of space within us to receive something from another, right? To be receptive. And so love is a sharing of the good. I mean, that's really how we might think of it this way. It's this kind of extension, an extension of self into self, so that love between persons is sort of a complementarity of existences, of being. To do that, there must be a center or a withinness of being to receive the other, because one must receive that which is not into oneself. That's in a sense a basis of love. At the same time, the human person is the most complex existence on earth. The most complex thing is not God. It's not anything of nature. It's not economics, not even politics. It's us. We are the most complex existence. And the thing is, this is something Carl Jung, I think Jung's psychology is really helpful in the way he began to understand the layers of what we are. We're deep. I mean, we go down, 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 down. What is this thing called the ego? The self. And, it comes from our childhood on, the experiences throughout our lives, the way we have dealt with those experiences, reconciled them. But, there's so many people who have unreconciled darkness in their life, unreconciled hurt, unreconciled anger, unreconciled jealousy. And sometimes we may push those things within us and say, well, it's over. I'm not dealing with it anymore. But not to deal with it is, in a sense, to deal with it, right? And to deal with it is to become unreconciled. And I think that disconnected self is the self that may yearn to love, and at the same time, it has deep levels of resentment, which is manifested as hate, or it's manifested as rejection. Evil itself is, in a sense, interestingly enough, Jung, sort of like Schelling, thought that evil is the unreconciled God within us. That God is sort of that there's a darkness of God within us that has to be brought to light, which is by way of our response, by way of our awakening to that God. And therefore, God is brought out from the wilderness, you might say, of our own inner being into, you might say, this relationship of love. But I think that evil and this hate that abounds in the world is coming from deeply disconnected selves, deeply places of darkness within the human heart that have been trampled on, that have been unreconciled, that have been unwilling, and or for some reason cannot come to a terms of wholeness within. Wholeness within is wholeness without. Love within is love without. And so, one of the things, and here's just a little plug for AI, is that one thing technology is doing is it's expanding of what we are. We can't stay where we are, by the way. We are really incomplete in our beingness. We're not complete. And so the world will, in a sense, be constantly riddled with hate and evil as we strive for love. But it is, in my view, a non-zero sum universe. It's not equal hate, equal love. It's actually love is continuing to triumph over the darkness that still lingers. And that is what we might call a cruciform. It's a cruciform way of life that we're constantly undergoing, and the need to undergo a suffering and death. The need to reconciliation is hard work. And sometimes we don't want to face the stuff within us, that's disconnected from everyone else. So it's not an easy either or thing, like we're just going to get rid of hate and everyone love one another. And by the way, it would be a really boring world if we just all loved one another, like, and everything was just.
I'm ready for boredom.
It's actually the limits of what we are, and it's actually the darkness of what we are that makes our striving energetic. It's what gives it its dynamism. And so there's something about the mystery of what we are that actually is, it's what propels us to create, to imagine that which doesn't exist, and to come and to constantly strive for new levels of existence.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any more
Hello.
hands.
Charles Courtney.
Charles Courtney.
Has his hand up.
Charles Courtney.
Pardon me?
Charles Courtney has a question.
Oh, really? I didn't see a hand.
Back to the
Okay.
wine story for a moment. With the cyborg Jesus, we have new wine on
Oh,
offer. The question is, where does it go?
Yeah,
And wine becomes a nutrient only when it is drunk. I think the lesson for us is don't be an old wineskin.
I completely agree, Charles. Do not be an old wineskin. Be a cyborg. It's much better.
Okay, I know it's 9 o'clock, but Ron Lenore had his hand up from the beginning and his name disappeared. So let's go to Ron.
It's actually two of us, and I'm Lenore. I'll do the question quickly. Before Christmas, someone sent me a copy of a poem reflection that you had written, Ilia, called the Christic. And I would just like to recommend that to people. I don't know if you even want to read it, but there is something about the poetry of that, so I'm just recommending, if Ilia doesn't have time to read it, look it up, because sometimes it's easier for me to hear things in a poetic way, or maybe after a rich presentation like tonight, all these concepts that my mind is saying, whoa, I'm going to try to get that one. I'm trying to. So anyway, I just wanted to recommend that. I live in Maryland now, and one of the great losses from being here and not in New Jersey is the Dodge Poetry Festival in Newark. Poetry. Anyway, I just wanted to make a point for that. I think you have to hold.
Yes, Ron. Do you have something too?
Yes, I would like to see what Ilia, what you would think as a theologian, how all of this relates to Jesus's vision or concept of the kingdom of God. I like to think of Jesus as starting a movement, and his vision of the kingdom of God is one of intimate relationship with each other and with God, which he dwells on in John's gospel. And it's bigger than the church. It is, and I'm just and it's creative, it's intimate, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on that might be.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, I think Christianity, and I think you're right. I think Jesus, I don't think he had in mind a church. He didn't come say, I'm here to start a church. By the way, I'm God. He really had a deep sense, a call, in a sense to, actually to Israel, to complete, what God had promised. But I mean, in a sense that I think Jesus is sort of the visionary of God. He really was. In a sense, Jesus was also a dreamer, although we never speak of Jesus as a dreamer. But he does have that sense that there's, something's breaking in. God is doing new things. This presence of God, the reign of God is among you, and we are called into something new. One thing I think we can say with fair certainty about the Gospels, it's about newness. It's about God is doing new things. Something new is taking place here. We're on the cusp of a new future, a new community, a new way to be humanity together, to be earth together. And that's where Christianity, I think, is to live, on the cusp of the new. It was never meant to be sort of this top-down, heavy male, law and order type of regime. That really, I think, cut it off. It cut off its oxygen supply. And so Christianity hasn't breathed. It has to breathe again. And I think that's one thing we want to do in the 21st century, and certainly through the Center for Christogenesis, is to breathe as this Christian life into a new way of being. And where, God is, this reign of God, this presence of God, emerging in our lives is here. It's already happening. It's small, but it can be more. And that's what we're called. We're called into the moreness of what God is, what God envisions for us. What we have to get ahead into our minds is that we are only part of a very large, expanding universe. So will this take place on Earth, or will it take place with other planetary life? And so one thing, we think too small, and we're called to think big. Jesus was a big thinker in his own day, and we're called to think big in our own day as well. And therefore, we can take a cue from science and tech, especially technology. which really is pretty imaginative today, robots and driving cars and flying, self-driving buses and airplanes and everything. And you think, wow, that's incredible. I think that should be the motto of Christianity. That's incredible. Phoebe. Phoebe?
Ken has a question. Ken Lashet.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. Thank you, Ilia. It's just mind blowing. Sometimes I feel boxed in by the church. Anyway, is it fair to say that we can't do what we do best unless God does what God does best, and God can't do what God does best unless we do what we do best? Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, Ken. Yes, because this word God really, I mean, this in itself is a whole other evening of discussion. But I don't think God is a being. I think God is this power of life that is at the heart of our lives. That God is not a big one of us. God is us. And that's the mystery of it all. Is us and not us. Because the more than us. And that's the mystery of God, is that here, we feel it, we're called to it. That's why we're here this evening, because there's something that's calling us. We feel drawn to something more. We can't exactly put our hands on it because God is always the more of that which exists. And yet this God is so intimately near, empowering us, saying, come on, let's go, get up and move on. And so, yes, part of us, more than us, not us, fully us.
Yeah, I mean, I feel empowered by God. I said, people sometimes ask me, what's going to happen when I die? I say, you're going to be absorbed into the full consciousness of God.
There you go. Yeah.
They laugh.
I think it'd be much more exciting, quite honestly. Yeah, I think death is going to be really cool. So, I mean, not that I'm, planning to die anytime soon, but
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think Bibi had her hand up. Bibi?
Yeah. I think that as you say, we're all co-creators with God in this, but it's not just we're not Christianity or the Catholics and so forth. They're the Buddhists and they're the Mohammedans and so forth. So do you see them moving in the same direction toward a unity, a creation, and working toward God as a one type of a thing, that they will also be changing their or filling the wineskins with new wine?
Yes. I think wherever the religious path leads one to a greater sense of wholeness and being in unity, there is God. In fact, in my view, that's what the Christ is about, but that's my language, to speak about that unity in language. I think there are many, I think, to think that we have, the God or the way to God. I mean, that really is hubris at its worst, seriously. I mean, this is a way, but there are many ways. But there's something about this way that I'm called to, that speaks deeply to me. But I have a very good Hindu friend, and who's written beautifully, actually, on love and teilhard. And his way is through bhakti. It's through the Hindu non-duality of spirituality. And he is completely, in my view, he's very Christic. That'd be my language to describe. He could use other language. I don't think we should let language get in the way of the realities, and I think that's what we tend to do. Language tends to carve us up, and language chops us up. So we have all these different religions and all these competing paths and all these different gods and salvations, and we have a very choppy world. I think, one of the best way to do it is not to talk about things, but to live into this reality. So yes, living into inner wholeness and outer unity is the way of, I think, what this God is about, this God of love, who is, in a sense, Omega, that unity and love. Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Ilia, for summarizing. I was going to summarize, but you just did it beautifully. And thank you all for joining us and participating in this wonderful discussion. I'm sure we could go on for a much longer time, but it is time. So thank you all.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you, Sister Ilia. Wonderful.
Welcome.
Be with you all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay.
You.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.